Stasi, 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 Stasiland.
Stasiland. Stories from Behind the Berlin Wall by Anna Funder. Read by Danica Fairman. About the author. Anna Funder was born in Melbourne in 1966 and grew up there and in Paris. She has worked as an international lawyer and a radio and television producer. In 1997 she was writer-in-residence at the Australia Centre in Potsdam. Stasiland, which was shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award 2003 and in Australia for the Age Book of the Year and the Queensland Premier's Literary Awards for Non-Fiction, is her first book. Dedication. For Craig Allchin. Quotations. A silent, crazy jungle under glass. The member of the wedding, Carson McCullers. The two of you, violator and victim, collaborator, violin, are linked, forever perhaps, by the obscenity of what has been revealed to you, by the sad knowledge of what people are capable of. We are all guilty. The True Confessions of an Albino Terrorist, Brayton Breitenbach. "Let the jury consider their verdict," the king said for about the 20th time that day. "No, no," said the queen. "Sentence first, verdict afterwards." Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll. Chapter 1. Berlin, Winter 1996.
Okay, here we go then. So the title of the first chapter, Berlin, Winter 1996. We've got something we find quite typical of Anna Funder here, and typical of travel writing in the way that she writes anyway, and the way that lots of people would write. You've got these use of proper nouns. So Berlin, the chapter is called. It sets the scene, literally sets the scene, in both time and place. So we have the proper noun of Berlin, we have the proper noun of the season, winter, and we have the time marker, the name of the year, 1996. And what we find is this chronology of events as we're led through this book, her journey, which is by its nature chronological. So here we are at the beginning, 1996.
I am hungover and steer myself like a car through the crowds at Alexanderplatz station. Several times I miscalculate my width, scraping into a bin and an advertising bollard. Tomorrow bruises will develop on my skin, like a picture from a negative.
Okay, so we start off then with, again, what is Funder's style. And one of the reasons this book became so popular was because it's so novelistic. It reads like a novel. And she describes people and events in a very figurative style, using lots of techniques such as metaphors and similes and personification and zoomorphism, well, particularly zoomorphism we find in this chapter and beyond, really. But let's look at this sort of line by line. I'm hungover and steer myself like a car through the crowds at Alexanderplatz station. So if we look first of all in the present tense, I am hungover. So we're there with her. It's in the present tense happening now. And steer myself like a car through the crowds at Alexanderplatz station. So we've got from the very first three words, it's quite self-deprecating. It's very human and self-critical. So her style, literally from the very beginning, is self-deprecating because she admits that she's hungover and that she's quite clumsy and disorientated. So she steers herself like a car through the crowds at Alexanderplatz station. Now, to use such a strong simile in the first sentence does smack of a novel. It doesn't feel like travel writing necessarily. It feels like a novel, a first-person novel. But let's look at that simile there. In fact, it's a metaphor, isn't it? The first was a metaphor. I steer myself is a metaphor, like a car through the crowd. So she's blending metaphors and similes together to create this quite a rich image in the very first sentence. And again, quite an unlikely image, because if she's hungover and therefore under the influence, it's sort of a reckless image to be comparing to driving a car anyway. So this first page, you can have lots of notes. it's quite packed full of things, so you'll need to squeeze these notes in as you're writing these in the page. Several times I miscalculate my width, scraping into a bin and an advertising bollard. Tomorrow, bruises will develop on my skin. So there's a certainty there. Tomorrow, bruises will develop on my skin. It's quite definite and imperative. It will develop. Like a picture from a negative. Again, it's another simile. It's quite it's a figurative description, and one which we would expect from a novel, perhaps, rather than from a piece of, political travel writing.
A man turns from the wall, smiling and zipping up his fly. He is missing shoelaces and some teeth. His face and his shoes are as loose as each other. Another man in overalls, with a broom the size of a tennis court sweeper, pushes disinfectant pellets along the platform. He makes arcs of green powder and cigarette butts and urine. A morning drunk walks on the ground like it might not hold him.
So I'll just break after each paragraph here because there's so much to say. So a man turns from the wall, smiling and zipping up his fly. Now, we find that Funda's quite obsessed with very human details, and often quite base human details, like toileting, or she has a particular thing for bodily fluids, it seems, as well. We'll come to that later on. And here we've got a bit of that, smiling and zipping up his fly. It's quite base, it's quite vulgar. She very much likes to describe the nitty gritty, the real world, rather than any sort of glamour. She's interested in the sort of the muck and the detritus of life, really, that she likes to describe. In fact, she uses that word herself in the next few pages. The word detritus. He's missing shoelaces and some teeth. Now, this is an example of what's called zeugma, which is spelled Zeugma. Zeugma, zeugma. It's a German word, and it's, I'm not sure what it means in German actually, but it's for our purposes it means this getting two meanings from the same word. So he's not just missing shoelaces, he's also missing some teeth. So it's when you use the same verb to get two different meanings, and the last one is often surprising, and this one is surprising because missing shoelaces is fair enough, but then we're surprised by the missing some teeth. So there's also this surprise, which is bathos, really. So it's kind of humorous as well, because she paints quite a vivid and unpleasant, grotesque picture of this man. He's missing shoelaces. Oh, and by the way, some teeth, which is obviously the more important of the two things to mention, but she leaves that till last. So it's zeugma and bathos being used together for comedic effect there, for humour. And as I say, she's interested in painting the very real pictures of people, warts and all, literally. It's about looking at the sort of bad bits as well. His face and his shoes are as loose as each other. So she's extending this description of his shoes, which are loose because of the lack of shoelaces, and comparing that to his face as well. Another man in overalls with a broom the size of a tennis court sweeper. Well, that seems like hyperbole, doesn't it? Because is it really that big? And quite often she uses these phrases that we sort of question, is it really that much or that whatever? And often it's ambiguous. Maybe it is that big. And she creates this world in which it's almost, she seems quite small, and she compares herself to Alice in Wonderland in a few pages' time. And it's this sort of intimidating, overwhelming world that she's in. So we're sort of encouraged to question: is this hyperbole or not? Maybe it is, maybe not. But it's certainly an interesting simile. Pushes disinfectant pellets along the platform. He makes arcs of green powder and cigarette butts and urine. So we've got these three things, this triadic structure here of green powder, cigarette butts and urine. So you've got this polysynthetic list as well. So green powder and cigarette butts and urine. And the last one then is sort of bathos as well, isn't it? We're back to bodily fluids again. And again, probably surprised. With the green powder, that's fine, that's his disinfectant. The cigarette butts, okay, fair enough. And then the urine is sort of a surprising one to include at the end. So there's a bit more bathos there. And again, it's Funda really not holding back from describing the real sort of grotesqueness, really, of life. A morning drunk walks on the ground like it might not hold him. That's a brilliant description. That's like something you might find in a Raymond Chandler novel. That's a sort of hard-boiled early 1930s, 1940s detective fiction. If you ever get a chance to read a book called The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, it's well worth a read. It's just a really good detective fiction story, but it's a classic, what's called hard-boiled detective, American sort of, it's where the kind of film noir style comes from. Anyway, this feels more like a description you might find in a Raymond Chandler novel than it would in travel writing. A morning drunk walks on the ground like it might not hold him. It's a figurative description, and it gives a real characterization to these nobodies, these drunks, these sort of homeless people who are anonymous, but they're given this real sense of character through Funda's writing. And I mentioned the Raymond Chandler book there intentionally, and you could certainly make reference to that in the coursework, in that it borrows from that style of a sort of hard-boiled detective, quite unforgiving description of people, particularly those who are on the fringe of society, as these people clearly are.
I'm catching the underground to Ostbahnhof to board the regional line down to Leipzig, a couple of hours from here. I sit on a green bench. I look at green tiles, breathe green air. Suddenly, I don't feel too good. I need to get to the surface quickly and make my way back up the stairs. At ground level, Alexanderplatz is a monstrous expanse of grey concrete designed to make people feel small. It works.
So here we've got that reference to the green, again, the green tiles, the green bench, the green air, which is quite a sensory description. And we get that particularly the sense of smell. Oh, excuse me. It's still a bit early in the morning. So we get this sense of the colour's been used as a sensory description. And we'll come on to the sense of smell later on, because that's quite a significant feature by itself. What we also have here then are proper nouns, the Ostbahnhof, the Leipzig. This is giving a sense of authenticity of where we are. If you remember when we looked in the anthology, at some of the texts like the Pepys Diary, we looked at those place names, the London street names, and it gives it that sense of authenticity. It's immersing us as the reader into this world. We are being forced to read these German place names just as she is, and so we feel as though we're there with her, and that's the purpose of this kind of non-fiction writing. And we then get, so the repetition of green again sort of enhances that sense of something unnatural about it, and this feeling of being overwhelmed. And then the Alexanderplatz, again another proper noun there as well, is a monstrous expanse of grey concrete. Well, that's a metaphor, isn't it? It's monstrous, a monstrous expanse, and it's almost, I don't know, is it zoomorphic? Is a monster animal? I'm not sure there is a word for sort of monsterizing something, but it's. I mean, to play it safe, you'd say it's a metaphor, but I would argue you could kind of push it to zoomorphic metaphor, because it's something kind of alive and not personification, but it's something living. It's something designed to intimidate, as she says it does. A monstrous expanse of grey concrete designed to make people feel small. Full stop. It works. Full stop. So you've got this minor sentence at the end of that, which adds so much more opinion, really, doesn't it? It's like it's quite, how just having a 2-word sentence can be really powerful, and in this case it does, because she's explaining that what it's set out to do, it does that. It does make her feel small, and we already get a sense of that from the way she describes the place already as being a bit sort of, she feels a bit like Alice in Wonderland. Okay, let's move on to the next section.
It's snowing outside. I move through the slush to where I know there are toilets. Like the train lines, these too are cut into the ground, but no one thought to connect them to the station they serve. As I go down the steps, the sick smell of antiseptic is overpowering.
Okay, so I mentioned before then the use of the sense of smell, and we have that here. It's what's called the olfactory description. So it's OLFACTORY. So like the word factory with OL before it, olfactory. Just referring to a sense of smell. Maybe we've met that phrase before at GCSE. I can't remember if we used it with the poetry. And of course what it does is, it, as you would find in a novel, it immerses the reader. It gives them a full sensory experience. And sense of smell is such a powerful sense, isn't it? And the sick smell of antiseptic is overpowering. We can almost smell it ourselves, and there's something quite vivid and lurid about the use of smell that can be more powerful than just describing the appearance of something. So it's designed to immerse us as the reader into this world, just as she herself is being immersed into that world too. So use of olfactory sense there. And what I would make a point of, if you can fit it in, is the fact that it's quite novelistic and it's more something you'd expect from a fiction piece, really.
A large woman in a purple apron and loud makeup stands at the bottom. She is leaning on a glass-paned counter guarding her stash of condoms and tissues and tampons. This is clearly a woman unafraid of the detritus of life. She has shiny, smooth skin and many soft chins. She must be 65.
Okay, so here we get probably the first of very, very many quite grotesque descriptions of the people she meets, and they're not very forgiving, they're not very flattering. A large woman in a purple apron and loud makeup. So, I don't know what you think of this, but for me, I mean, that metaphor, loud makeup, we know what it means. It's sort of over the top, isn't it? But it's a metaphor because it can't really be loud, but it's a phrase we tend to use to refer to something being quite garish or in your face, over the top. And so her makeup is over the top. It's not a compliment, certainly. She's leaning on a glass-paned counter, guarding her stash of condoms and tissues and tampons. Well, I mentioned before that Funda tends to have a penchant for the bodily fluids, and here we've got 3 of them. You're welcome. So in a triadic structure as well, and so I don't know if there's any bathos there. Maybe not. Probably not. Actually, I think it's just 3 different things of life that deal with bodily fluid, isn't it? And so, as she says, this is clearly a woman unafraid of the detritus of life. It's she almost like she herself is sort of, because she sells those things, she's almost represents those things. She just is kind of the trash of life, really. She has shiny, smooth skin and many soft chins. Again, it's not. I mean, the shiny, smooth skin, I guess, is pleasant, but the many soft chins is not particularly complimentary. She must be 65, so it's subtle, but it's derogatory, and I think it's. I don't think Anna Funda's trying to be mean. I think it's just that she's trying to give us a really accurate, vivid sense of what real people look like. There's no glamour here in the way that there's, people selling stuff in the train stations probably aren't glamorous, and it's what people really look like, and it's what things get sold at those little kiosks in real places. She's not trying to glamorize or romanticize Alexanderplatz. It's very much the reality of what's there, and that's the style that she goes for in this book altogether. It's very real and often unflattering and unapologetic, really.
Good morning, I say. I feel awkward. I've heard stories of German babies having their input in food and their output in feces weighed in some attempt to get the measure of life. I've always found this kind of motherly audience inappropriate. I use the toilet and come out and put a coin in her dish. It occurs to me that the purpose of disinfectant globules is to mask the smells of human bodies with something worse.
So back to that sense of smell again there as well, the olfactory senses. But just backing up a little bit, there's a sort of mechanical stereotype or robotic stereotype that she's drawing on there of the German babies having their input in food and their output in feces weighed in some attempt to get the measure of life. She's taking this very mechanical approach that she's heard, which may be true. I don't know. There's probably some truth in it. And then sort of turning it into this quite existential question about measuring the measure of life, not just the measure of sort of health and nutrition, but actually measuring life itself. It's sort of this quite grand stretch in the way she describes that. But it's very mechanical, and again, it's very base. She's quite vulgar. She's referring to essentially bodily fluids again. It's sort of input and output, and she's not shying away from the sort of the more grotesque elements of life, in the way that she describes these people, the Germans, in this book. So I think it's worth just drawing these things together and looking at the way she describes elements of people in the most unflattering ways and often the most human and often basely human aspects of human life.
What's it like up there? The toilet madame asks, nodding at the top of the steps. Pretty cold. I adjust my little pack, but not too bad. Not too much black ice. This is nothing yet, she sniffs. I don't know if it's a threat or a boast. This is what they call Berliner Schnauzer, snout. It's attitude. It's in your face. I don't want to stay here, but I don't want to go up into the cold either. The disinfectant smell is so strong I can't tell whether I'm feeling sicker or better.
So here we've got a bit more zoomorphism then. This is nothing yet, she sniffs. Sort of like almost animalistic, isn't it? A bit of zoomorphism there. And also then this description of Berliner Schnauzer, snout. It's sort of, even that sort of has animalistic overtones, doesn't it? Connotations of animals with snouts. This sort of boast and arrogance and attitude that Berliners are supposed to have. So that phrase there, Berliner Schnauzer, well, not only is it zoomorphism, but she's also giving us this German phrase. She's immersing us as the reader in this German world that she finds herself in. So by giving us by using the German language in that way, and then a definition afterwards, she's translating it for us and then allowing us to sort of be guided by her, which of course is accurate for a piece of travel writing as this is.
I've been here 21 years, since the winter of 75. I've seen much worse than this. That's a long time. Sure is. I have my regulars, I can tell you. They know me, I know them. I had a prince once, a von Hohenzollern. I think she must use the prince on everyone, but it works. I'm curious. Uh-huh. Before or after the wall came down?
So we've got some direct speech here in this dialogue with the toilet madame, and it's interesting because it suggests authenticity, and we sort of take it as at face value. But actually, we do have to question how reliable this is. I mean, this is her memoirs. It's her memory, her recollection of events. Now, she wouldn't have been recording every conversation she had with people randomly on the train station selling, tissues and whatever. But yet we're given this dialogue as though it's verbatim, word for word, what was said. And I think we have to question that a little bit. And that's the nature of travel writing. She's allowed to do that. That's her, as the author, she's allowed to take some poetic license with that and sort of reconstruct conversations. But I think we have to just be mindful of the fact that this is not necessarily exactly what was said. And so it might just be worth keeping that in mind. It's not a great deal to write down about it. It's just something to be aware of, that we're given something that we take as face value, and we're sort of lost in this dialogue, and this world is very compelling. But we do have to bear in mind that this might not be exactly what was said word for word.
Before. He was over on a day trip from the West. I used to get quite a few Westerners, you know. He invited me, she pats her large bosom with a flat hand, to his palace. But of course I couldn't go. Of course she couldn't go. The Berlin Wall ran a couple of kilometres from here, and there was no getting over it. Along with the Great Wall of China, it was one of the longest structures ever built to keep people separate from one another. She is losing credibility fast, but her story is becoming correspondingly better. And suddenly, I can't smell a thing any more. Have you travelled yourself since the wall came down? I ask. She throws her head back. I see she is wearing purple eyeliner, which, at that angle, phosphoresces. Not yet, but I'd like to. Bali, something like that. Or China. Yes, China. She raps her painted nails on the glass cabinet and dreams into the middle distance over my left shoulder. You know what I'd really like to do? I'd really like to have me a look at that wall of theirs.
So I'll just back up a little bit then for this this section here. There's this reference to the prince and the fact that she couldn't go, and then of course she couldn't go. The Berlin Wall ran a couple of kilometres from here. So we've got this sort of epistrophe here, slightly inverted epistrophe, because she changes, of course I couldn't go, to of course she couldn't go. But by finishing that previous paragraph and then picking up with the same phrase, more or less the same phrase, in the paragraph afterwards, you've got this epistrophe, and it's used for effect. So epistrophe is when often a sentence is repeated, or the end of one sentence is picked up at the beginning of the following sentence. Here it's done over a paragraph, but it works in the same way. And I think it's used here for emphasis. Of course she couldn't go, not only for the reasons that she's, well, I mean, we have to wonder whether she really was invited by a prince to go to his palace. So there's that, the sort of potential that perhaps she couldn't go because it wasn't really appropriate. But also there's the very real reason that she couldn't go, because geographically she couldn't go past the Berlin Wall, which was there to divide. So it was impossible for her to get there. So there's two meanings there, and of course that raises the theme of the book, which is the sort of, up until now, has been this elephant in the room. The whole book is about the divide of the Berlin Wall and its people between West and East, Berlin and Germany. And so we have here this, it raises the topic, it brings into light this idea of division and the wall itself. And we then get the reference to the Great Wall of China as another massive structure used to keep people away from each other. And so, in fact, two references to the Great Wall of China, because then the toilet madame herself, she wants to go to China and have a look at their wall, which I'll come on to in a second. So it raises the theme, it kind of propels the narrative forward, which of course is, even though it's travel writing, there is still a narrative here. We're following her, we're following the people she meets, and there is a bit of a thread to this narrative. So it's introducing that narrative, which is important in the first chapter. We then get this back to description of her. I see she's wearing purple eyeliner, so we've gone down a few lines now, which at that angle phosphoresces. Well, again, I mean, I don't know what you think about purple eyeliner, or what I think about it, but it doesn't sound that nice to me, or that, well, I need to be careful what I say, don't I? It doesn't seem that natural to me. It doesn't seem like I'm not an expert on makeup, but I don't think purple eyeliner is probably that natural looking. And certainly combined with the other descriptions of her, sort of this patting her large bosom, and her many chins. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a particularly flattering description. I don't know what you think about that, but that's how it comes across. She's wearing purple eyeliner, which at that angle phosphoresces. It sounds really quite vivid and lurid, and perhaps, I don't know. It's an interesting description at least. I'll leave it there. And then we get this description about travelling, and her painted nails. She wraps her painted nails on the glass cabinet and dreams in the middle distance over my left shoulder. And then she wants to go to China to have a look at the wall of theirs. So, I mean, the whole description of her, the painted eyes, the eyeliner, the painted nails, it's quite, well, I keep using that word, lurid and vivid. It is. It's quite over the top. It's quite a spectacle. And then there's sort of humour here. The fact she leaves this paragraph with this little page break on this direct speech of hers, that she wants to have a look, she wants to have me a look at the wall of theirs. And she's even capitalised the word wall there as well, sort of made into a proper noun. Now, of course, that's Anna Funder's editing rather than anything that could be said. This is just spoken, it's conversation, so you can't push it in the same way. But Anna Funder's decided to, I must stop calling Anna Funder, just call her Funder. Funder. And she, presumably here, is wanting to make the wall have some importance because it's central to the book. But there's a sort of humour to this, because she's going from one regime where the wall divided its people. She wants to go and visit China to go look at their wall. It's like there's a lack of imagination there, isn't there? And a sort of, I don't know, I guess it just shows the sort of interest, the curiosity we have as humans to see these things that ruin our lives, really. And it's interesting that she's lived in this situation and lived with these conditions, and yet the one thing she wants to do is travel to another place that has these, or had these conditions, so she can kind of compare walls. It's sort of laughable, really.
From Ostbahnhof, the train pulls out and finds its cruising speed. The rhythm soothes like a cradle, hushing my tapping fingers. The conductor's voice comes through speakers reciting our stops. Wannsee, Bitterfeld, Lutherstadt Wittenberg. In northern Germany I inhabit the grey end of the spectrum. Grey buildings, grey earth, grey birds, grey trees. Outside, the city and then the country spool past in black and white.
So here we've got a long list of proper nouns again, with the place names, the Wannsee, Bitterfeld, Lutherstadt, Wittenberg. Again, giving us that sense of realism, that authenticity, that we're there with her, travelling through, and we can almost hear the conductor's voice reciting the stops. But before we even get to that point, we see the personification of the train. From Ostbahnhof, the train pulls out and finds its cruising speed. So even the train is sort of characterised as a living thing. It's moving and making choices almost. So she's even bothering to characterise the transport system. So a characterisation is very, very vivid in this text, and these are features you'd find, as I say, in fiction, in novels. So for her to bother to do that here is makes it an interesting read and an unusual read, in that we're sort of really drawn into this world that she creates here as though it's a piece of fiction. But of course, I guess it's more disturbing the fact that it isn't, and maybe that's the point, is that this world that she's describing to us is very real, and it really happened. This isn't fiction. This is truth. So, and perhaps we're as shocked as she is, and that's maybe one of the reasons that she does that, and personifies and characterises the things around it to make it feel like a novel and make it feel unreal. When at the end of it, we have to acknowledge that it is very real. And then towards the end of that paragraph, outside the city and then the country spool past in black and white. We've got the grey as well, haven't we? So the grey end of the spectrum, grey buildings, grey earth, grey birds, grey trees. That asyndetic list there, and also the anaphora of the word grey, just emphasising and reinforcing that sense of similarity. Everything's grey, everything's uniform in that sort of way that it would be in the Soviet bloc. It was the area owned by the Soviet Union, and buildings were built to a specification. They were built in a sort of communist style of without much variation. And then the metaphor of spooling past in black and white, almost like it's on a film reel, like a black and white film reel has been played, and she's watching it spool past on a sort of a piece of film. So again, I suppose, having just said that, perhaps this helps with that, because watching something spool past on a film, this idea of what's real and what's not, is it film, is it creation, is it art? No, it's not. It's actually real, but we've been invited to think of it as something which is unreal and fictional, when actually it's more jarring to remember that it's very, very real for these people.
Last night is a smoky blur. Another session at the pub with Klaus and his friends. But this is not one of those hangovers where you write the day off to darkness. It is the more interesting kind, where destroyed synapses are reconstructing themselves, sometimes missing their old paths and making odd new connections. I remember things I haven't remembered before, things that do not come out of the ordered store of memories I call my past. I remember my mother's moustache in the sun. I remember the acute hunger and loss feeling of adolescence. I remember the burnt chalk smell of tram brakes in summer. You think you have your past filed away under subject headings, but somewhere it waits to reconnect itself.
So here we've got that metaphor at the end of reconnecting itself, but it's also prolepsis. It's sort of foreshadowing, because we tackle a bit later on the chapter called Puzzle Women, and we refer to these puzzle women who were employed to piece together the evidence shredded by the Stasi at the end of the GDR. And so, either knowingly or not, I suspect knowingly, Funda here is giving us that sense of her synapses being reconnected and reforming and making new versions of themselves in a similar way to what we see the Stasi doing, both in its active reign and power, but also afterwards, after the fact, when people are re-piecing together the scraps and shreds of evidence after the end of the GDR and then the end of the Stasi. So it's an interesting, possibly use of prolepsis there. Now, what you could say about that, I suppose, is that it's a feature of narrative writing, but it also drives the narrative forward. It drives her story forward, which is what this is. It's a true story, and it's driving this story forward because it's connecting, just as her synapses have been connected, it's connecting the dots in this story too, that this is her on a journey to find out the truth, to connect pieces of information to make some sort of version of reality, So that's what she's doing, but it's also what the Stasi did, and it's what the puzzle women are doing, or were doing. I don't know if they're still doing now, but certainly were doing at the time this book was written.
I remember learning German. So beautiful, so strange. At school in Australia, on the other side of the earth. My family was nonplussed about me learning such an odd, ugly language, and though of course too sophisticated to say it, the language of the enemy. But I liked the stickle-brick nature of it, building long, supple words by putting short ones together. Things could be brought into being that had no name in English. Weltanschauung, Schadenfreude, Sippenhaft, Sonderweg, Scheißfreundlichkeit, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. I like the sweeping range of words from heartfelt to heartsick, and I like the order, the directness that I imagined in the people. Then, in the 1980s, I came to live in West Berlin for a while, and I wondered long and hard what went on behind that wall. A barrel-stomached woman opposite me unwraps black bread sandwiches. So far she has managed to pretend I am not here, although if we weren't careful our knees could touch. She has painted on her eyebrows in arches of surprise or menace.
So here we get a little bit of an investigation of the German language itself and the sticklebrick nature of it, which is an interesting metaphor, isn't it? This sort of idea of bolting bits together to make new words. And then she immerses us completely in this German Lexis. So we have these Weltanschauung, Schadenfreude, Sippenhaft, Sonderweg, and the others. And so, we're being immersed in this world just as she is. And I think she's exploring what the language says about the people. And for her, there's a connection between the sort of bolted together efficiency of the language in the people as well, and the way in which she likes the order and the directness that she imagines to be in the people. So there is that sense there that the language represents the sort of sensibilities of the people, the German people. We then get the next paragraph, again another unflattering description of a woman here, again a barrel-stomached woman. I mean, how awful. Unwraps black bread sandwiches. I don't know, there's something just grotesque about it, isn't there? Just the barrel-stomached woman. It's not something you'd tend to describe. I've never heard that used to describe a woman before. It's often a man is a barrel-stomached man. And then she's unwrapping black bread sandwiches, which I know it's obviously a thing, but it just put together, it sort of sounds a bit grotesque. There's a sense of obesity here, a sense of sort of gorging and eating. And then she's painted on her eyebrows, so more makeup references here to painting on her eyebrows in arches of surprise or menace. So we've got these painted on eyebrows in arches of surprise, and then a bit of bathos at the end, or menace, which changes the meaning completely if she's intending to paint on this look of aggressiveness and aggression and menace. So I don't know, I see it as being a sort of grotesque description. I don't know whether that's my reading of it or whether you agree, but it doesn't seem very flattering, at least. And the use of the surprise or menace there, the bathos at the end, is something we've begun to expect from Funda, that use of bathos, and it changes the meaning completely, because what goes from sort of a quirky, eccentric decision or appearance suddenly becomes quite a suggestive and threatening one.
I think about the feeling I've developed for the former German Democratic Republic. It is a country which no longer exists, but here I am on a train, hurtling through it, its tumble-down houses and bewildered people. This feeling needs a sticklebrick word. I can only describe it as horror romance. It's a dumb feeling, but I don't want to shake it. The romance comes from the dream of a better world that the German communists wanted to build out of the ashes of their Nazi past, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. The horror comes from what they did in its name. East Germany has disappeared, but its remains are still at the site. My travelling companion takes out a packet of West cigarettes, which seem to be the most popular brand here since the wall fell. She lights up and directs her breath of smoke over my head. When she's finished, she butts out in the flip-top bin, clasps her hands around her middle, and falls asleep. Her expression, fixed with pencil, doesn't change.
So it might seem like I'm laying it on a bit thick about these descriptions, but I think it's because there is a theme here, and as we get through the I almost call it a novel and through the book, and certainly by the end of the book, we've seen there is a pattern to the way she describes, particularly women. I think, although the men also don't get described in a very flattering way, it's very real, but the women in particular, I think when it comes to makeup, she's quite brutal, and here the woman sort of, I don't know, something very vulgar. She's eating, she's smoking, and then she's sleeping. It's quite, I don't know, selfish behaviour maybe, would you say? She butts out in the flip-top bin, clasps her hands around the middle and falls asleep. And her expression fixed with pencil. And look at that little parenthetic clause there. It's a relative clause. It's fixed with pencil inside those commas, and it's parenthetic because those commas are acting like parentheses, brackets. And I don't know, yeah, I mean, yes, her expression is fixed with pencil because it's her eyebrows that are painted on, drawn on. But it's something sort of, there's a stubbornness in her that's been represented here as well. It's almost like she is just quite, I don't know, yeah, I guess stubborn maybe, and just this is what she does, and no one's going to change that. There's sort of an unwillingness here to change, even down to the way she puts on her makeup has been fixed and set with pencil here. So just, I don't know, an interesting thing to note possibly, that the makeup here seems to represent the sensibilities. So the language represents the people and their sensibilities, but also the way that they use makeup, it seems, according to Funder.
I first visited Leipzig in 1994, nearly 5 years after the wall fell in November 1989. East Germany still felt like a secret walled-in garden, a place lost in time. It wouldn't have surprised me if things had tasted different here, apples like pears, say, or wine like blood. Leipzig was the hub of what everyone now calls die Wende, the turning point. The Wende was the peaceful revolution against the communist dictatorship in East Germany, the only successful revolution in German history. Leipzig was the start and the heart of it. Now, 2 years later, I'm on my way back. In 1994, I found a town built by accretion. The streets wound crookedly. There were crumbly passages through buildings that led unexpectedly into the next block, and low arches funneled people into underground bars.
I was meaning to let that play on there, but I will just stop it because the use of that phrase there, the low arches funneled people into underground bars, that metaphor funneled there is quite telling, because there's a sense here of control, isn't there? Already been hinted at that people are controlled and manipulated and sort of herded almost like cattle, in this case funneled into underground bars. So we've got this tone being set here of people being controlled and manipulated by the infrastructure of Leipzig.
My map bore no resemblance to how life was lived in Leipzig. People in the know could take hidden shortcuts through buildings or walk along unmarked lanes between each block, moving above and below ground. I got thoroughly lost. I was looking for the Stasi Museum in the Runde Ecke, or Round Corner building, which had formerly been the Stasi offices. I needed to see for myself part of the vast apparatus that had been the East German Ministry for State Security. The Stasi was the internal army by which the government kept control. Its job was to know everything about everyone, using any means it chose. It knew who your visitors were, it knew whom you telephoned, it knew if your wife slept around. It was a bureaucracy metastasized through East German society. Overt or covert, there was someone reporting to the Stasi on their fellows and friends in every school, every factory, every apartment block, every pub. Obsessed with detail, the Stasi entirely failed to predict the end of communism, and with it, the end of the country. Between 1989 and 1990, it was turned inside out. Stalinist spy unit one day, museum the next. In its 40 years, the firm generated the equivalent of all records in German history since the Middle Ages. Laid out upright and end to end, the files the Stasi kept on their countrymen and women would form a line 180 kilometres long.
Okay, so if we just back up a little bit then to that paragraph, the Stasi was the internal army by which the government kept control. And then it mentions it knew who your visitors were, it knew who you telephoned, and it knew if your wife slept around. So there's that triadic structure of what the Stasi knew, who your visitors were, who you telephoned, and if your wife slept around. So a bit of bathos there, the last of those three things being something quite surprising, maybe, that the first two might be more acceptable, maybe more understandable, but the third one seems very personal and very invasive, which of course the Stasi was. So the bathos there just heightens that sense of how invasive the Stasi police, the secret police, were at that time. And then I'll just keep going because we've got a few more things to say in this paragraph. In fact, it happens again, doesn't it? We get that list there. There was someone reporting to the Stasi on their fellows and friends in every school, every factory, every apartment block, every pub. So we've got that asyndetic list there of places where the Stasi could infiltrate. And it essentially was everywhere, even schools. And a bit of bathos there at the end, that even places where people would go for relaxation and for, an informal time was being scrutinised by the Stasi as well. So that reference to the pub at the end, I think particularly with the lack of connective, you'd expect it to be every factory, every apartment block and every pub. But the fact there's no connective even, it's just still the asyndetic list, heightens that sense of surprise that even the pub, even somewhere the informality of a pub is being used by the Stasi. And then at the end of that paragraph, we've also got the putting into context how many records they made. The files the Stasi kept in their 40 years would form a line 180 kilometres long. So we've got that numerical lexis there, which gives it a bit more sense of surprise, but authenticity as well, of literally how many records they made. Sorry, I'm even boring myself with this, my own waffle. But there we are. So it's an impressive and terrifying amount of records that these people made in the space of 40 years.
Eventually, I found the Runde Ecke, and it was huge. A set of steps led up to vast metal-clad double doors with studs on them. I shrank like Alice.
So I made reference to that earlier on, the reference to Alice there, and it's an exophoric reference because it's referring to Alice in Wonderland. But of course she does feel small in comparison. So there's that very simple reason for using that simile. I shrank like Alice. But it's also, I think, a fitting simile because it really does raise the issue of what's real and what's surreal, what's true and what's not, and what's fact and what's fiction. And I think that's the whole point of this book, is that this seems like it's some surreal world of make-believe, and of course the horror of it is that it's not. It's very, very real.
To the right there was a pale rectangle in the cement facade, a bit of the building that hadn't been tanned by smog. A plaque saying, Ministry of State Security, Leipzig Division, or something like it had hung there. It had been removed in a kind of fearful joy during the revolution, and has not been seen since. I walked around inside. All the desks were just as they were left the night the demonstrators took the building. Frighteningly neat. Dial phones sat in breeding pairs. Shredding machines had been thrown out the back after collapsing in the Stasi's final desperate attempt to destroy the most damning files. Above one desk was the 1989 calendar with a picture of a woman naked from the waist up. But mostly there were just communist insignia on the walls. The cells were open, set up as if prepared for more prisoners. Despite the best efforts of Miss December, the building felt damp and bureaucratic.
So if we back up a little bit to the telephones sat in breeding pairs, dial phones sat in breeding pairs, more of a zoomorphic metaphor there. Again, it's quite humorous as well, isn't it, this idea that the telephones are sort of as breeding pairs, but it's zoomorphic. And it's sort of laughable, isn't it, the description of this place, frighteningly neat. There's sort of a humour and a ridiculousness to this place. And then, of course, you've got this sort of more human aspect, I guess, with the 1989 calendar with a picture of a woman naked from the waist up, which then is referred back to with a bit of catalepsis at the end. So despite the best efforts of Miss December, the building felt damp and bureaucratic. So that's a little cataleptic reference back to the previous sentence, with the model on the calendar. And of course it's humorous as well, because it's making it seem like she's attempting to liven the place up a bit, even though it's just a picture, but it's sort of giving her, even characterising the sort of the calendar model, is quite interesting technique that she uses. So do look out for that with Funda. She's always keen to sort of to characterise and to spotlight the minor characters, if you like, the outsiders, even if it's simply a naked woman on a calendar being used for the entertainment of presumably the male Stasi workers in the office.
The Citizens' Committee administering the museum had mounted displays on cheap particle board screens. There was a print of the famous photograph from the autumn 1989 demonstrations. It showed a sea of people holding candles, their necks craned up to the building, staring their controllers in the face. They knew it was from here that their lives were observed, manipulated, and sometimes ruined.
So a bit of bathos there in that triadic structure. Their lives are observed, manipulated, and sometimes ruined, saving the... In fact, no, sorry, ignore that. It's not bathos. It's incrementum. In fact, it's tricolons crescens because, which I'll spell in a second, but it's getting worse, isn't it? Observed, manipulated, and sometimes ruined is building to a crescendo. So it's tricolons, tricolons. Tricolons is one word. And then crescens is the next word, crescens. So it's an example there of those three things building to a climax, and in this case quite a tragic and sinister climax of being ruining people's lives.
There were copies of the increasingly frantic telexes from the Berlin headquarters of the Stasi to here, where the officers had barricaded themselves in with tin on the windows. "Secure all ministry premises," they read, and "protect all covert objects." My favourites were the pictures of protesters occupying the building on the 4th of December 1989, squatting in the corridors with the surprise still on their faces, as if half expecting to be asked to leave. As they entered the building, the Stasi guards had to ask to see the demonstrators' identity cards, in a strange parody of the control they were, at that very moment, losing. The demonstrators, in shock, obediently pulled their cards from their wallets. Then they seized the building. Large and small mysteries were accounted for when the files were opened, not least, perhaps, the tics of the ordinary man in the street. This document was on display. Signals for observation. 1. Watch out, subject is coming. Touch nose with hand or handkerchief. 2. Subject is moving on, going further or overtaking. Stroke hair with hand or raise hat briefly. 3. Subject standing still. Lay one hand against back or on the stomach. 4. Observing agent wishes to terminate observation because cover is threatened. Bend and retie shoelaces. 5. Subject returning. Both hands against back or on stomach. 6. Observing agent wishes to speak with team leader or other observing agents. Take out briefcase or equivalent and examine contents.
So here we've got this numerical sequential list given to us verbatim from the museum, and I guess that again immerses us into the world of Funda. It's the world of the Stasi, and we're reading it just as she's reading it. We've sort of got this first-hand experience using the very wording of the Stasi themselves, which is all the more chilling, really, isn't it? And the fact it's this numbered sequential list adds to that sense of the procedure that the Stasi used, this very, very methodical procedure that the Stasi had.
I pictured the street ballet of the deaf and dumb, agents signalling to each other from corner to corner, stroking noses, tummies, backs and hair, tying and untying shoelaces, lifting their hats to strangers and rifling through papers, a choreography for very nasty scouts.
There's something really funny about that description, I think, isn't there? And it's, again, she's painting the ridiculousness of it, this street ballet, this metaphor she uses of the street ballet of the deaf and dumb. And I think just the alliteration there of the deaf and dumb heightens that sense of how ridiculous this is. Agents signalling to each other from corner to corner, stroking noses, tummies, backs and hair. I mean, that word tummy is quite a funny word, isn't it? I don't know if it's just me, but I find the word quite funny. It's obviously stomach is in the list, and she reduced it to tummies, which sounds quite childlike and or childish and sort of silly, which of course it is. So they're standing there stroking their tummies and signalling to each other, a choreography for very nasty scouts. So she extends that metaphor from the ballet at the beginning of that paragraph to this choreography by the end of the paragraph. So it's an extended metaphor of this sort of song and dance, or dance, I suppose, this sort of silent dance in the street, and how ridiculous that is and was.
Towards the back of the building, 3 rooms housed Stasi artefacts in glass cases. There was a box of fake wigs and moustaches, alongside small tubes of glue to affix them. There were women's vinyl handbags with built-in microphones disguised as flower petals in a studded decoration. There were bugs that had been implanted in apartment walls and a pile of mail that never reached the West. One of the envelopes had a child's handwriting on it in coloured pencil, a different colour for each letter of the address. One glass case contained nothing but empty jars. I was staring at it when a woman approached me. She looked like a female version of Luther, except she was beautiful. She was 50-ish, with high cheekbones and a direct gaze. She looked friendly, but she also looked as if she knew I had been making mental ridicule of a regime which required its members to sign pledges of allegiance that looked like marriage certificates, confiscated children's birthday cards to their grandparents, and typed up inane protocols at desks beneath calendars of large-breasted women. This was Frau Holitzer, who runs the museum.
So here we've got some more epistrophe used across, or near it, well, effectively epistrophe used across paragraphs. It's not technically epistrophe because we've got the who runs the museum in between them, but the name Frau Holitzer as a link between one paragraph and the next. And of course that serves to drive the story forward. It takes us to the next person we speak to. We find this a lot in this book. We tend to find that the end of one chapter will finish with meeting somebody or going to meet somebody, and then the next chapter is then titled the name of that person, and then we meet that person. So it's always sort of looking forward to the next meeting with somebody and then taking it from there. So we've got this epistrophe used for that reason, to link and to bridge these people, to make connections really, which of course is sort of possibly symbolic, because that's what the Stasi were doing. That's what that's what the people are doing now, to sort of reassert their own identity in a way.
Frau Holitzer explained to me that the jars in front of us were smell samples. The Stasi had developed a quasi-scientific method, smell sampling, as a way to find criminals. The theory was that we all have our own identifying odour, which we leave on everything we touch. These smells can be captured and, with the help of trained sniffer dogs, compared to find a match. The Stasi would take its dogs and jars to a location where they suspected an illegal meeting had occurred, and see if the dogs could pick up the scents of the people whose essences were captured in the jars. Mostly, smell samples were collected surreptitiously. The Stasi might break into someone's apartment and take a piece of clothing worn close to the skin, often underwear. Alternatively, a suspect would be brought in under some pretext for questioning, and the vinyl seat he or she had sat on would be wiped afterward with a cloth. The pieces of stolen clothing or the cloth would then be placed in a sealed jar. The containers looked like jam bottling jars. A label read, "Name, hair, name." Time, 1 hour. Object, workers' underpants. When the citizens of Leipzig entered this building, they found a large collection of smell samples. Then the jars disappeared. It was not until June 1990 that they turned up, in the smell pantry of the Leipzig police. But they were empty. Apparently, the Leipzig police had taken them for their own use, even in the period after the fall of the wall, when democracy was beginning here. The jars still bore all their meticulous labels. From these it was clear that the Leipzig Stasi had collected smell samples of the entire political opposition in this part of Saxony. No one knows who has these scraps of material and old socks now, nor what they might be keeping them for. Later, Frau Hollitzer told me about Miriam, a young woman whose husband had died in a Stasi remand cell nearby. It was rumoured the Stasi orchestrated the funeral, to the point of substituting an empty coffin for a full one, and cremating the body to destroy any evidence of the cause of death. I imagined paid-off pallbearers pretending to struggle under the weight of an empty coffin, or perhaps genuinely struggling beneath a coffin filled with 80 kilos of old newspapers and stones. I imagined not knowing whether your husband hanged himself, or whether someone you now pass in the street killed him. I thought I would like to speak with Miriam before my imaginings set like false memories. I went home to Australia, but now I am back in Berlin. I could not get Miriam's story, the strange second-hand tale of a woman I had never met, out of my mind. I found a part-time job in television and set about looking for some of the stories from this land gone wrong.
So like I was just saying there, really, there's that link to Miriam now, isn't there, towards the end of this paragraph, and of course the next chapter is titled Miriam. So there's always sort of looking forward to the next person to meet, and I think that, like the Stasi in a way, looking for secrets, looking for information, that's how this text works, is that it's Funda's own search for the truth, and she is sort of has a methodical approach, which in a way parodies the one of the Stasi in the sense that she, well, like anybody would, she meets the people and asks them their story. And so here we find out a little bit about Miriam, sort of teasing the next chapter almost, this sort of giving us a little summary of what Miriam's story is, about having a husband who presumably committed suicide in his cell, but it was covered up and the funeral was sort of faked, and she wasn't allowed to see his body, which we'll find out about in the next chapter. And so there's that sense of narrative progression that we're going to head forward into this next piece of the puzzle, really. And so for chapter 1, we'll leave it there. I'll see you for next one for chapter 2. Bye for now.